They shot her husband on their second wedding anniversary in a ballroom full of witnesses, and they called it an accident. Savannah, Georgia, September 1884. Crystal chandeliers burned above polished floors. Silk gowns whispered across the room. Glasses of champagne caught the lantern light. And Jonah Grant was still standing when Everett Vane raised the pistol. 3 seconds later, Jonah was dying on the floor. His wife, Eliza, stood only a few feet away, close enough to see the smoke leave the barrel, close enough to catch him when his knees collapsed, close enough to hear the entire ballroom fall silent. Not shocked silence, the other kind, the silence that falls when 200 people realize they have just witnessed something they are not supposed to name. Within 60 seconds, the doors were locked. Within 2 minutes, the curtains were drawn. Within 3, the first lie had already been spoken. The tragic misfire. That was Everett Vane's explanation. His voice calm, measured, already managing the room. And as Eliza knelt on the floor, holding her husband while blood spread slowly across the gray fabric of her dress, Everett made the only mistake that would matter before dawn. He looked at her and saw grief. He saw a small woman, a poor woman, a black seamstress, kneeling in a room full of powerful men, and he decided she was no longer dangerous. What he did not see was the woman Eliza Grant had become. For 14 years, she had worked in rooms like this, moving quietly between tables, measuring sleeves, pinning hems, adjusting silk collars for women who spoke freely while she worked. Because wealthy people often forgot something important. They forgot the seamstress was still in the room. Eliza learned to listen. She learned which husbands lied to their wives, which wives already knew. She learned the voices of men who praised the law in public and rewrote it in private. She learned the layout of expensive houses, which doors locked from the inside, which ones only looked like they did, which corridors servants used to move unseen, and most importantly, she learned how to disappear. That was why she stood near the east wall of Magnolia Assembly Hall and watched. She noticed Everett Vane watching Jonah from across the room. Not casually, carefully, too carefully. She noticed Lydia Vale, Everett's elegant associate, arriving 20 minutes early, then quietly rearranging the seating near the main doors. She noticed 3 men in evening coats who moved like guards. Not guests, guards. Jonah noticed none of it. He was laughing near the fireplace, one hand lifted in the middle of a story. Warm, open, the kind of man people trusted easily, the kind of man Eliza loved and feared for. 2 years of marriage had not made her less grateful for that laugh, or less afraid of what goodness costs. In a place like Georgia, freedom existed on paper, but powerful men had spent years learning how to erase what that paper meant, and Jonah Grant had been reading their records very carefully. 3 weeks earlier, he came home late and said something that changed everything. I found something. 3 weeks earlier, Jonah Grant came home after dark. He did not remove his coat. That was the first thing Eliza remembered later. Not the words, not the documents, the coat. Still buttoned, still damp from the evening rain. He stood in the middle of their kitchen, ledger satchel hanging from one hand, as if sitting down might make the discovery real. Their supper went cold between them. He stared at the table for a long time, then finally spoke. There are contracts. Eliza waited. Men told the truth in pieces, when they were afraid. Labor agreements, Jonah continued, for freed families outside the county line. He placed several copied pages on the table, columns of numbers, names. Marks where signatures should have been. The debt resets every season, he said quietly. Seed costs, housing fees, tools, transport. A man works a year to pay what he owes. Then spring comes, and somehow he owes more. Eliza studied the pages. She did not need to understand every number. She understood the shape of the thing. What kind of contracts? She asked. Jonah met her eyes. The kind meant to look legal. In Georgia, men were always inventing new shapes for old cruelty. Freedom had ended slavery on paper. Paper had never stopped powerful men from building another cage. Leave it alone, Eliza said. Her voice calm, not dramatic, just certain. Jonah folded his hands. Someone has to say what's true. Eliza almost laughed. Not because he was wrong, because goodness sounded fragile when spoken aloud in a country built to punish it. Truth won't protect you, she said. It might, Jonah answered. No, she said softly, not from men like Everett Vane. He didn't argue. That frightened her more than if he had, because it meant he had already gone too far. Over the next days, Jonah became quieter. Not distant, just careful. He stayed late at the clerk's office, burned scraps of paper instead of throwing them away, checked the street once before locking their door, sometimes twice. More than once, Eliza woke in the middle of the night, Jonah's side of the bed empty. She would find him in the kitchen, a single candle burning low, copying numbers into fresh pages, always the same careful handwriting. Then the invitation arrived. Magnolia Assembly Hall, formal banquet, key county figures attending, hosted by Everett Vane. Jonah read the card once, then again. He knows, Eliza said. Jonah did not answer. That silence told her everything. He knows you found something. He might suspect, Jonah said. He knows. Their eyes held across the small kitchen table. Then Jonah smiled. Small, tired, trying to reassure her. The whole city will be there, he said. Men don't do reckless things in public. Eliza turned away so he would not see her expression, because she worked in rooms like that. She hemmed dresses for the wives of commissioners and merchants. She listened while they spoke too freely, forgetting the seamstress was still kneeling at their hemline, and she knew something Jonah did not. Public rooms did not make powerful men safer. Public rooms made them bolder, if everyone inside needed the same lie. The morning of the banquet, she sewed a missing button onto Jonah's best jacket. Needle through cloth, pull, tighten, knot. A simple task, the kind wives perform when they are pretending their hands are steady. Jonah kissed her forehead. 2 years, he said. 2 hard years, Eliza answered. 2 beautiful ones. She wanted to ask him not to go, wanted to tear the invitation in half, wanted to lock the door. Instead she smoothed the front of his jacket. Stay close to me tonight, she said. He took her hand. I always do. Back in Magnolia Assembly Hall, the prayer had just ended. Everett Vane drew the pistol. There was no warning, no accusation, no drunken mistake, only the sharp certainty of a man who had chosen this moment long before the guests arrived. The shot struck Jonah high in the chest. He folded almost silently, wineglass slipping from his hand, breaking somewhere beneath the table. Eliza caught him as he fell, his weight collapsing into her arms, blood spreading slowly across her dress, and around them, 200 people stood perfectly still. No scream, no outrage, only silence. Then movement. Everett's men, already at the doors, already taking positions. Positions they did not need to think about. For a moment, Eliza heard nothing. Not the music, not the storm gathering outside the tall windows, not the murmurs spreading across the ballroom. Only Jonah's breathing, growing shallow against her shoulder. She pressed her hand against the wound, Warm blood filled the space between her fingers. His eyes found hers. For one terrible second, he tried to smile. Then the strength left his face. Jonah Grant was gone, and the room remained perfectly still. 200 witnesses, silk gowns, polished shoes, men with influence and women with diamonds at their throats, watching, but not one of them stepped forward. Not one. Eliza noticed that before she noticed anything else. No one came to help her up. No one touched Jonah. No one spoke his name. They simply watched, calculating, because every person in that ballroom understood something at the same moment. Everett Vane had just killed a man in public, and no one knew yet what he intended to do next. Everett moved first. He crossed the ballroom slowly, hands open, a gesture meant to look peaceful, a gesture meant to calm the room. He crouched beside Eliza with the careful gravity of a man performing sympathy for an audience. "This is a terrible accident," he said gently. "A tragic misfire." Eliza looked at his face. He did not look surprised, not even slightly. His eyes were steady, already managing the story, already deciding what the evening would become. Behind him, Lydia Vale was moving through the room, calm, efficient. She spoke quietly to guests near the doors, guiding them away, redirecting them toward the center tables, separating small groups, organizing the witnesses before anyone understood that was what she was doing. Eliza noticed something else. Everett's men were already standing at every exit. They had not moved there. They were simply already there. That was when the truth arrived. Not slowly, not uncertainly, completely. This had been planned. The shooting, the locked doors, the guards, even the witnesses. Everything had been arranged before the first glass of wine was poured. Eliza lowered Jonah gently to the floor. She placed one hand over his chest. Then she lifted her eyes to the room and began to think. Because she had spent 14 years learning something most people never noticed. Powerful men always believed the quiet people in the room were the least dangerous. The servant, the clerk, the seamstress. They believed those people did not understand what was happening. They were almost always wrong. 2 guards stood near the service entrance, their voices low, careless. The way men speak when they believe no one important is listening. "Too many people saw it," one of them muttered. "Vane will sort the story. What about the witnesses?" A short pause. Then the answer. "We clean the loose ends before Pierce arrives." Loose ends. Eliza understood that language. Loose ends were not papers. Loose ends were not rumors. Loose ends were people. She looked slowly around Magnolia Assembly Hall. 200 people locked inside a building, with armed men guarding every door, and a man who had just proven he was willing to kill. Jonah had not been the end of the night. He had been the beginning. Eliza pressed her hand once against her husband's chest. A quiet farewell. Then she stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just calmly. The way she had stood up in 1,000 wealthy rooms before this one. Invisible, forgettable, unimportant. That was exactly what Everett Vane still believed she was. And that belief was about to destroy him. The anniversary gifts still sat on the table near the window. White ribbon, brown paper, a small card in Jonah's careful handwriting. No one had touched them. In the chaos of locked doors and frightened guests, the table had been forgotten. Eliza walked toward it slowly, not rushing, not hiding, moving exactly the way she had learned to move in rooms controlled by powerful men. Calm, cooperative, invisible. She picked up the smallest box. It felt heavier than it should have. Her fingers paused on the ribbon. Then she opened it. Inside, there was no gift. Beneath a layer of folded cotton lay several sheets of paper, copied ledger pages, columns of figures, names, dates, amounts, owed, and beneath them, a second sheet, a list, 12
Names written in Jonah's precise hand. Eliza read them once. Then again. The first name belonged to a county commissioner. The second, a cotton merchant she recognized from across the ballroom. The third, a land assessor who had been speaking with Everett only minutes before the shooting. Investors. Jonah had not only discovered the scheme, he had copied the proof. And he had brought it here tonight. There was one more note. 4 lines, written the morning of the banquet. Eliza unfolded it carefully. If something happens tonight, give these pages to Detective Rowan Pierce. Not local law, Pierce specifically. Her hand tightened slightly around the paper. Jonah had known. He had walked into Magnolia Assembly Hall knowing Everett Vane might try to silence him. And he had believed the crowd would protect him. He had been wrong about that. But he had not been wrong about the evidence. Eliza looked up from the papers. And for the first time since the gunshot, she saw the room differently. Not as witnesses. Not as innocent guests. But as men with something to lose. Because several of the names in Jonah's ledger were sitting inside this room. Right now. Watching Everett Vane manage the evening. Everett had not just killed her husband. He had killed him to protect all of them. Which meant every investor in Magnolia Assembly Hall had just become something very dangerous. A liability. Fear moved through wealthy rooms quietly. Not like panic. Not like screaming. Fear among powerful people looked different. Tight shoulders. Careful glances. Whispers exchanged behind raised glasses. Eliza understood fear. She had spent 14 years watching it. And she knew exactly how to guide it. She started with the cotton merchant. A broad man named Holt. His name sat third on Jonah's list. Eliza stepped beside him, not facing him, just close enough to be heard. I heard Everett asking about the anniversary gifts, she said softly. Holt frowned. Why? I don't know. She paused, but it sounded like he was looking for something specific. Then she walked away. The land assessor was next. He was already nervous. Turning his watch chain over and over in his fingers. Eliza leaned close as she passed behind his chair. I overheard Lydia speaking with Everett. His eyes lifted immediately. About what? About narrowing the list. She let the silence sit between them. What list? He whispered. Eliza only looked at him, then continued walking. The whispers began spreading within minutes. Not loud, not obvious, but steady. Like fire through dry wood. Across the ballroom, Holt cornered the county commissioner. The assessor pulled another investor aside near the windows. Their voices low, urgent, eyes flicking toward Everett, and then away again. Guilty men rarely trusted each other. And fear made trust disappear quickly. The storm outside chose that moment to arrive. Rain hammered the tall windows. Thunder rolled across the Georgia night. 2 lanterns flickered. Then one went out completely. In the dimmer light, the room began to lose its order. Guests shifted. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. The careful arrangement Lydia had built began to break apart. And Everett Vane did not yet understand why.
By midnight, Magnolia Assembly Hall no longer looked like a celebration. Chairs overturned. Lanterns broken. Rain blowing through the shattered west windows. Guests clustered together in frightened groups. And the quiet structure Everett Vane had built for the evening was collapsing. It began with his guards. Amos Creed, Everett's head of security, had been watching the room carefully all night. He had seen the whispers spreading, seen the investors arguing, seen the fear changing direction. Fear had started the evening pointed at Eliza. Now it was pointed somewhere else. At Everett. Amos crossed the room quietly, set his pistol on the table, and sat down. 2 of his men followed, weapons lowered, arms folded, watching. The investors noticed immediately. Men who had spent their lives reading power understood the signal. Everett was losing control. Holt stood first. You said the documents didn't exist. His voice trembled. but it carried across the room. Everett turned slowly. "Sit down. My name is in that ledger." The words cracked through the ballroom like another gunshot. More men stood. The commissioner, the land assessor, each realizing the same terrible truth. If Everett survived the night, they would all be buried with him. Then Eliza stepped forward, the ledger pages in her hand. She placed them on the anniversary table, white linen beneath them, crystal glasses still standing nearby. "These are the contracts," she said quietly. "Debt agreements for freed workers who could not read what they were signing." She placed the second page beside them. "And these are the investors." The room fell silent. Everett looked at the papers, then at Eliza, and for the first time that night, he truly saw her. "You think this changes anything?" he asked. His voice was calm, but the calm had cracks in it now. "No court in Georgia will take your word over mine." Eliza held his gaze. "Maybe not." She gestured toward the room. "But they might." The investors had moved away from Everett, several steps, enough to be noticed, enough to matter. Fear had finished its work. Everett's composure broke. He lunged toward the table, toward the papers, toward Eliza, his hand closing around her arm. Amos Creed moved instantly. Two investors stepped forward. A lantern fell from its hook. The room exploded into movement. In the confusion, Everett Vane made the final mistake of his life. And when the struggle ended, he did not stand up again. The storm quieted slowly after that, rain fading, wind settling, silence returning to Magnolia Assembly Hall. Eliza stood beside the anniversary table, white flowers still resting in their glass vase, untouched. She did not feel victory, only exhaustion. The deep, hollow exhaustion of a woman who had spent an entire night holding the world together by will alone. She looked once toward the place where Jonah had fallen. 2 years more to come, he had written. Dawn arrived quietly, gray light spreading across the ruined ballroom. Detective Rowan Pike entered just after sunrise. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the broken furniture, the exhausted witnesses, the bodies covered with tablecloths, and the woman standing calmly beside the anniversary table. Eliza handed him the ledger pages. "Jonah found the truth," she said. "I only made sure it survived him." The investigation lasted months. Labor contracts across 4 counties were exposed. Plantations operating under Everett's debt schemes were dissolved. Men who had believed themselves safely powerful disappeared from public life. But the city remembered something else. They remembered the quiet seamstress, the widow who did not scream, did not collapse, did not allow silence to bury what had been done in that room. Magnolia Assembly Hall still stands today, its floors polished, its windows repaired, its lanterns burning again. But people in Savannah still speak about that night in lowered voices. The night when a room full of powerful men discovered something they had forgotten. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one no one thinks to watch.